Sounds like a deal.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Adam Coleman is here, columnist at the New York Post, who is going around and about the place in the UK. He's been here for a week promoting his new book, which we're going to talk about. But I just said to Adam, right, I said, so how long have you been in? Have you managed to get outside of London? And where have you been? And he said, Swindon. And I'm like, no, Adam, I could have given, not like, no offence to Swindonians out there. There are plenty of old towns, quite nice. And I know the Glue Pot, that's a good pub, sells proper ciders. Great train station as well, great connections into London. But, you know, it's not really the sort of heart and soul of the English pastoral scene, but there you go. Anyway, we've got you here to talk about the book that you have just written, The Children We Left Behind. What is the premise of this book?
Well, when I started writing for different publications like the New York Post, I would always see like a family connection when it came to like big tragic events, especially like mass shootings, things of that nature. And more often than not, they were always coming from some sort of broken family situation. Recently, we had that big case where the homeless man was choked on the subway. After the man who had choked him, he was restraining him, they found him not guilty. The father's coming out and saying, we need to do better. And my response in the Post was, where were you this entire time? Because you weren't involved in his life. You know, that man, while he was a menace as an adult, he had to deal with the murder of his mother by his stepfather, you know, and being left behind essentially to go into the foster care system to end up in the streets. So while these examples are like the extreme cases, the issue of family separation is actually just growing. And I think it has a lot to do with adult individualism, where they want to do the thing they want to do, everybody rationalizing their choices, and so no one becomes accountable. And so if I only think about me, you know, if I say, if I'm happy, my children will be happy, well then what happens to the kids? Well, the kids get dragged along to their adult whims, and nobody thinks about what's going to happen to those kids.
It's amazing. We've spoken about, in the UK, and I'm sure in America too, the impact of coming from families, particularly without fathers, and how there is statistical correlation between kids who are brought up without a dad in their lives and who enter things like the world of crime. And this speaks very closely to me because, you know, my biological father upped and left when I was a baby and cut all ties. Just nothing. Went off. Big kid himself, basically. I don't have many pleasant words to say about him, and I don't care about saying that on air. But I'm really lucky that my mum remarried when I was 5, a man who I called Dad, who's been a brilliant father figure. And so guess what? I'm not tooling around with zombie knives killing people. But you are right that there has been a normalisation of this and this push towards adult individualism. You now have, more than anything, there's this problem out there, right, with men who don't want to have children or leave it really late because, oh, guess what? It means some sense of sacrifice. They don't seem to be driven by this desire to be a father, the desire to sort of continue the family line. They're instead more worried about, oh, it's going to be too hard. I don't want to make the sacrifice. And so what you've got increasingly, a load of women going it alone. This cannot be good. What has gone wrong? How do we get society back into the sort of the idea that the pronatalist idea, you know, this idea that actually we're on earth to procreate, to be mums and dads, and that is so fulfilling.
Well, I do think that for many people, whether it's men or women who have this low regard to procreating and having a family, a lot of that comes from fear about how they grew up. Many of them grew up in dysfunctional homes. Like, I can't tell you how many times I hear somebody sound like they don't want to get married, but the reasons why come from a place of fear. And it's very specific examples, and it's because they saw it at their house. They saw their dad being physically abusive or verbally abusive, or they saw their mom being manipulative. They saw divorce. They saw all the dysfunction when they were growing up. And so that is a sense of fear for them because they're afraid that they're going to repeat the very thing that they grew up in. So I think that's what a lot of that comes from. And so that's where, for example, in the United States, they tell a lot of women, you know, don't rely on a man. But a lot of that comes from, they've seen examples where they relied on a man and he was abusive or he controlled the money, he did whatever he wanted to do. And the mother tells the child, don't be like me. And so that child grows up in fear to do everything to further a career, which is fine if she wants to. But she wants to further a career because she's afraid of that thing that deep down inside she actually does want.
What is the solution to all of this, though? You know, how do we sort of set things back on track? I mean, I think there's a sort of degradation when it comes to this idea of social shame. Once upon a time, if you were 41 years old and you weren't married or kids, people would think you're a bit weird. It would be embarrassing. People would be like, oh, there he goes, funny old Jeff there, never got married, never had children. Whereas now it's something that men sort of celebrate, their freedom, their independence. And same with women, you know, I think there's also been a lot of attacking men and putting the blame on men, and women saying, I can do it all, I can have it all, I don't need you. Do you think a lot of this equally comes down to the fact that gender roles have been demonised? This whole idea that women is in charge of hearth and home and man goes out and is the breadwinner?
Well, I think the gender roles have been mixed and matched whenever it suits somebody. So, for example, I do think that for many of the very strong feminist types, they believe that as long as I work, then I don't need him. So what they're actually doing is minimizing his role as a man and as a father within the home. So the man, and a lot of men believe this too, this is part of the problem, it gets in the culture. A lot of men think that their only role in the house is to make money. That's it. And I can tell you as a father to a now 19-year-old that I provide far more than just money for him. You don't care about that. You know, even the richest man in the world, Elon, struggles with his kids.
How many has he got, Lord knows?
Exactly, because he's made a whole bunch of reckless choices. But even the richest man in the world can't buy the one thing that's really important to children, and it's time.
Yeah.
You know, the kids need your time. They need to learn things from you. They need to see, especially for young men, they need to see a model. How do I become a man? And to see that man, and a successful man, and a healthy man. And then on top of that, how does he interact with women, right? That teaches me about relationships. So there are all these lessons that are missed from young men, and they're not getting that because, well, the father wants to be reckless and go around the world and spread his seed, in the case of someone like Elon. But just regular old guys, if they struggle economically, they think that their worth is putrid.
I want to ask you something. I don't know if you sort of touched on this. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, and I'm blooming well looking forward to. Do you think there's a role for religion to play in all of this? Because when you look at demographic change, you know, I had an interesting interview with a prominent Muslim influencer, and he said, look, don't blame us for having more kids than you. We still believe in that in our culture. You guys are the ones who have abandoned all that, and we would love to see you guys re-embracing Christianity. What sort of role? I mean, we've now got the first American Pope. What sort of role might a sort of resurgence of faith have in changing things?
It was very interesting because I do have my testimony to Christ in there. I was baptized last year. But decades of coming to that point, being agnostic and coming to finding Christ. And I realized I watched a lot of testimonies of people coming to Christ online. Almost every single one of them starts off where they maybe went to church when they were young, or maybe they were finding God, and then all types of family separation issues, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever. But that childhood trauma kept them away from God. And it took them a long time to come to God. And these are the ones who finally did. Many of them don't. So I do think the family element actually prevents us from going towards religion, towards faith, because we always end up to that same question. If God loves us so much, why couldn't he make my father stay? You know, you start blaming God for all the things that your parents are doing wrong. Why isn't God here to protect me from my feelings? And I went through that when I was a kid. Where is God when I went into a mental hospital at the age of 8? You know, where was he to protect me? And so all these the blaming and the questions, is God even real? These were the questions I had from when I was a kid into my 30s, essentially.
Oh, and well done. I mean, I love the fact that you were baptized. Was it last year?
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations. That's a wonderful, wonderful story. Wonderful to hear that. You've been in Britain now for a week. One thing that Brits find fascinating is what Americans think of us. I mean, you know, it seems to me we've got people in the White House, particularly JD Vance, who's like, up yours, Europe. Can't stick you guys. You don't stand on your own 2 feet. You leech off you parasitic, useless continent. But the bond between America and Britain is so much stronger. You know, when you look at the amount we share, I mean, I kind of can barely tell the difference sometimes if I'm listening to a piece of music, if it's American or British. Yeah. But when you're over here in Britain, you've been mingling with all of us. What have been your take-homes? When you go back to America and you're speaking to your family, so what was it like over there in Blighty? What are you going to tell them?
Well, granted, I've only been in London. So London, in many ways, reminds me of New York, but cleaner.
Blimey, that really?
Yeah, New York is pretty bad. I would say, in many ways, polite on the surface. New Yorkers are rougher, but when you get to know them, they're polite. So there are a lot of similarities. The thing that always comes up, especially engaging in political discussions, is freedom of speech. That's been a big topic. And what's been fascinating, I can't remember his name, was it Adnan, one of the MPs, who's been going on and on about you shouldn't be allowed to say these things.
Yeah, basically wants to bring in Islamophobia, burning Qurans, all of that.
Right. And my response is, and then at the same time saying, we have freedom of speech. And it's like, clearly you don't. Because the Americans understand what freedom of speech is. You get to insult people, you get to say whatever you want to say, as long as you don't threaten someone, you're good to go. So this idea of having a nanny state to protect someone's feelings because a bad word was said, while I don't agree with the bad word or insulting people, unless they really deserve it in my opinion, but I don't necessarily agree with it, that shouldn't be enforced by the police. You shouldn't be arrested and gone to jail for it. That is what freedom of speech is. So I do think you have people like him who don't fully understand what freedom of speech is. Of course we have freedom of speech, except you can't say this and this and this. Like, clearly you don't.
Oh, he knows full well. He knows what he's doing, that one. But it's interesting, because I was thinking this argument about freedom of speech. We were like, oh, it needs to be protected. You can't just say this and that and that. And I'm like, no, you should be able to. But actually, what I would push back on is some of the absolute dangerous stuff that is being taught to kids in schools. Yeah. You know, if you're going to control freedom of speech anyway, it's in the classroom. You shouldn't have kids being taught that you can be one of 72 different genders. Or if you want to identify as a, you know, cat, then so be it. It's all gone topsy-turvy, and I get the impression that we've imported a lot of this stuff from America.
You're welcome.
We have. Frankly, we have. And we always seem to be about, 5-10 years behind you. If you want to know what's going to happen in the UK next, see what's happening in America. And I'm quite hopeful, actually. There seems to be something taking place in America, which is a resurgence of social traditionalism. Am I right in that, do you think?
Yes. And it's because we've swung too far left on many things. And on top of that, we had this very strong trend of doing radical left-wing things. Even for me, at one point, I was a moderate Democrat. And even for me, that was like, this is crazy. This is extreme. Obviously, we know what men and women are. Like, this was never a question. And all of a sudden, of course it's a question. And we're getting all this stuff that went just too far left. And now we're trying to find our equilibrium, as far as people, politically, and even just socially. Now people feel more comfortable because the trend is dying off. Everyone's sick of it. Even corporations are dropping DEI, which I like to famously say I predicted. Everybody's moving away from this radical position that everyone has this deep-seated hatred. No one likes each other. There's this race war. If you just thought of America as online, you would think that the race war is coming around the corner, and it's not. All this stuff is contrived. So I do think that there is a resurgence. There are people who are getting off the computer. We're getting more normal conversations that are happening. So I'm actually relatively optimistic.
Are you not worried though? Because, talking about things like the normalization of broken homes and things like that, that actually the younger generation, not too worried about the kids in high school, weirdly, because they seem to be getting their, some sort of interesting views from TikTok and seem to be kind of right wing and wanting, like crying out for traditionalism. But the leaders of tomorrow, kind of our generation and a bit younger, are the ones who have been brought up with all this mad indoctrination. And what's that going to mean in 10 years' time when the kids have sort of come through the university system about now and are going into the workplace, who have been radicalised by this sort of loony left-wingery, then become our future leaders? Do you have any fears for them?
No, because those young people will be voters. So at the end of the day, the voters, there's going to be a social dynamic, because when it comes to social issues, they start first and then it leaks into politics. We didn't start with should men be in women's sports and stuff like that first. It became a social issue, and then people wanted to legislate off of it. So I actually am relatively optimistic about Gen Z. My son, I believe he voted for Trump. This was his first election that he could vote. And his other friends are much of the same. I think the reason why they're looking more towards traditionalism is because they've seen many of their parents just kind of be so open, and it feels like no one cares about which direction that they go, and no one's thinking about their future. You know, we have all these boomers, which not necessarily a shot at boomers, but we have all these radicalized liberal boomers who are out there protesting because the stock market went down for a couple of days and blaming Elon and Trump. Meanwhile, you have young Gen Z, you have older millennials who still can't afford to buy a house. You know, and it seems very lopsided as far as, do these people actually care about the future? Meanwhile, they're the ones who are in power right now. So, especially in the Democratic Party, it's become old, cruddy, and no one cares about them. And the Republican Party has actually gotten younger. And that has actually shocked me. If you told me 10 years ago that would be the case, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, it is. It's funny, isn't it? I remember predicting the social dynamic would change. You can only stretch an elastic band so far before it pings back. And I think we're kind of beginning to ping back a bit. Now, before I let you go, Adam, it's been so inspirational talking to you. Send a message out there to any young men, especially, that might be listening to this. And what life advice, in a nutshell, would you give them?
Whew.
I know it's a big one.
That there's no job, there's no award that I've ever received that has been greater than raising a happy and healthy young man. That there's so much joy and beauty in raising a child, that for them to miss out on it because of some fear, some irrational fear, or because what they saw on the internet, or some distant relationship that didn't work out, I would hate for them to miss out on that opportunity.
That's beautiful. Adam, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
And, well, hopefully next time you're back in Britain, let me be your tour guide.
You got it.